and strength to the Lord of lords. Power and strength to the Lord of lords. Glory to the King of kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of lords. Glory to the King of kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of lords. Holy One, all creation crowns you King of kings. Holy One, King of kings, Lord of lords. Holy One, glory to the King of kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of lords. Jesus, Lord, with eyes unveiled we will see your throne. Jesus, Prince of Peace, Son of God, Emmanuel, glory to the King of kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of lords. Power and strength to the Lord of lords. Power and strength to the Lord of lords. Glory to the King of kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of lords. Glory to the King of kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of lords. Holy One, all creation crowns you King of kings. Holy One, King of kings, Lord of lords. Holy One, glory to the King of kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of lords. Jesus, Lord, with eyes unveiled we will see your throne. Jesus, Prince of Peace, Son of God, Emmanuel, to the Lord of Lords. Power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Holy One, all creation crowns you King of Kings. Holy One, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Holy One, glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Jesus, Lord, with eyes unveiled we will see your throne. Jesus, Prince of Peace, Son of God, Emmanuel, glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Holy One, all creation crowns you King of Kings. Holy One, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Holy One, glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Jesus, Lord, with eyes unveiled we will see your throne. Jesus, Prince of Peace, Son of God, Emmanuel, glory to the King of Kings. strength to the Lord of Lords. Power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Holy One, all creation crowns you King of Kings. Holy One, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Holy One, glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Jesus, Lord, with eyes unveiled we will see your throne. Jesus, Prince of Peace, Son of God, Emmanuel, glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Glory to the King of Kings. Majesty, power and strength to the Lord of Lords. Holy One, all creation crowns you King of Kings. Holy One, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Holy One, glory to the King of Kings.
Leviticus 23 and probably 16 as well. 16 is a more detailed telling of the Day of Atonement, so I think it'll tie in really well here. Last time we finished off looking at the holiness of the priests in chapter 22, talking about acceptable sacrifices and things of that kind. In chapter 23, we began discussing the various feasts. We talked about some of the words that are associated here. Feasts, meaning that you had to travel to it. Convocation, meaning that it was an assembly. And so looking at the ones that are called feasts rather than just the ones that are called special days. We made some of those distinctions, like Sabbath is not called a feast because you don't travel for it. but it is still referred to as a holy assembly day. We talked about the Passover as well, reminding them of the day that God chose not to kill them, but instead accepted someone else instead. We talked about that significance for us. We talked about the Feast of the First Fruits, which is the celebration of the very beginning of the harvest. We talked about the Feast of Unleavened Bread as well, which is to celebrate that beginning of the harvest. Day one, you bring in the very beginning of the harvest, and then you eat unleavened bread the rest of the week because you're focused on God and you're thinking of God. We talk about the Feast of Weeks. We call it Pentecost in the New Testament, down there in verse 15 and following. This is the big harvest, and so you're celebrating that massive harvest. And so what we saw with these is you can really see that beginning part of the book of Acts here, that you can see God accepting a sacrifice instead of killing everyone he should have killed. He accepted someone else. That was Passover. That is Christ's death. We saw, looking at the Feast of First Fruits, that he is the firstborn. He is the beginning. We saw the Feast of Weeks, the massive harvest there at the beginning of the book of Acts, because they're now in the land. And that's the reference back here to Leviticus. You're in the land. You have the big harvest now. You have to be celebrating. And so we looked at some of those things. The last things that we talked about was the Feast of Trumpets down in verse 23. Feast of Trumpets is a day that says, hey, you guys need to be getting ready. This is the 7th month. This is your important month. This is the month that's got two main feasts, main convocations that you need to be prepared for. And so they blew trumpets throughout the entirety of the land. Notice the wording there in 24 and 25. It doesn't describe it as a feast. We call it a feast because then it's really nice and pretty, and we have 7 of them. But it calls it a holy convocation. They're to get together, but not in Jerusalem yet. They're just to get together where they are and remind each other of why in the world this trumpet is being blown. That brings us to Day of Atonement. Anybody have any remaining questions from the previous class? Okay. Let's start again in verse 26. Now, on the 10th day of the 7th month is the Day of Atonement. It shall be for you a time of holy convocation. You shall afflict yourselves and present a food offering to the Lord. You shall not do any work on that day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. For whoever is not afflicted on that very day shall be cut off from his people. Whoever does any work on that day, that person I will destroy from among his people. You shall not do any work. You guys get the point yet? How many times there does he say don't work on this day? He doesn't do it for all of them. He doesn't do it to this extent even just for the Sabbath day. But he wants to be very clear. This is a special day. Something unique is happening on the Day of Atonement that doesn't happen on the other days. He continues on in verse 32. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest. You shall afflict yourselves on the 9th day of the month, beginning at evening. From evening to evening shall you keep your Sabbath. So that's all it talks about Day of Atonement here in chapter 23. I think we're going to go ahead and go to 16 in a moment and look at the full extended Day of Atonement before we talk about Feast of Booths, because I think it'll fit better. I just decided it now. I couldn't decide. But notice what it has to say here in 23. There's a few important details. One, it takes place on the 10th day of the 7th month. So we're talking 10 days later after the trumpets have blown. This is important. You've heard this. You're in Zebulun. You're in the northern part of the nation, because we're talking about a time when they have taken the land. You have to be getting ready. You've got 10 days to make it to the gathering down in Jerusalem. You have 10 days. And you better be there on that 10th day, because if you're still moving, if you're still setting up camp, if you're still making sure your animals that you brought for sacrificing are in position, no, you can't be doing any of that on the 10th day. So get moving is the purpose of that trumpets, to make sure that you're there on the appropriate day. It is the day as well, verse 28. You shall not do any work on that day. It is the Day of Atonement, to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. It is a day of affliction, the next verse calls it. You are to be afflicted that day, potentially meaning that you're supposed to fast that day. It's a little ambiguous. I'm not going to hold hard and fast to it. But just run that with a grain of salt. There's an affliction associated with this day. You're not just utilizing part of the day. It is an entire day devoted to Day of Atonement. It is the day when atonement is made. Something is going to happen today that is different than when it happens on other days. And we've already gone through the sacrifices, the first 9 chapters or so. And we've seen several of them talk about making atonement, sin and guilt especially. Talk about this sacrifice happens to make atonement for you so that you won't die. Like that full arc goes several times through sin and guilt offerings. But this day is a little different. This day is a special day for the whole congregation. It is a special day because it also encompasses the entirety of the year. And it leads into something. It's got some symbolism associated with it, which we'll talk about in greater detail when we read over chapter 16. All right. Anybody got any comments on the verses that are here before we start talking about what they actually did? Yeah. Right. Oh. Don't make me figure that out. I got to look up what's the difference between an adjective and a noun and first. Yeah. Especially when we compare it with chapter 25, which we'll probably get to next week, probably not to this week. But that's talking about Sabbath years, it's talking about year of Jubilee. And it uses the word Sabbath to describe them again, which has to be a different definition. Like, you can't talk about a Sabbath year meaning do no rest or no work the entire year, only do resting and holding convocation. Yeah. Not as far as I know. Mm-hmm. Yes. Here especially, yes. It seems to be associated with the Sabbath concept earlier in the chapter, back in verse 3, verse 3, because it calls it a Sabbath of solemn rest there as well. This is something special, rather than how it's not going to use the same terminology in chapter 25, when it calls it a Sabbath year or a sabbatical year. But it does seem to be, at the very least, intentional. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Did I see a hand? No? Okay. Let's go to chapter 16 then. Okay. Chapter 16, verse 1. This is the Day of Atonement. This is what they did. This is how they functioned. And we'll notice the kind of sacrifices. Pay attention to the sacrifices again. I'll point them out, but notice who is doing which sacrifice and what is its purpose. So, verse 1, the Lord says to Moses, after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron. We have a timetable here now. So, the 2 sons have committed their atrocity before God. They've been killed. God has yelled at Aaron. Aaron has been mad at God. All of that has happened here. And then we have Day of Atonement, which kind of makes it even more important. Because there's a lot of badness that's happened in chapter 10. And now they're going to have a Day of Atonement where they have to come to God and talk about it. We're going to see that as we get towards the end. When they drew near before the Lord and died. In verse 2, the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. So, just like he does in so many of the other sections of Leviticus, he starts off with the rule. Don't enter the Holy of Holies is what we refer to it as. Most common here, it just calls it the holy place where the mercy seat is. Don't go in there. If you go in there, you will die. Don't go in there. However, he then says how he can go in there. And there is one occasion when he is required to enter. So notice when he says in verse 3, but in this way, Aaron shall come into the holy place with a bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Now stop there. A bull for a sin offering, who is the sacrifice for? What do you guys remember? That's all you need, bull and sin. What do we got? Could be the group. It could be who? Say again? Yes, the priest himself. You got 2 options here. The bull is used for the priest. The bull is used for the entirety of the congregation. Because then when you get down to the lesser ones, you've got one leader as a goat. Individuals are they got a whole slew of options at that level. But when we're talking about a sin offering, we're in Leviticus 16 for you guys. When you're talking about a sin offering that is utilizing a bull, it has to be for one of the two. So this is Day of Atonement. I'm not going to make you guys predict which one it's going to be used for. We'll see it in a second. And then the second one is a ram for a burnt offering. Not a lot of details that we can draw out of that one. You got a whole slew of options for burnt offerings, and they're available to everybody. So we can draw the conclusion of the kinds of sacrifice that need to be made. Because he's making a sin offering and a burnt offering, Aaron is saying to God, by the offering of the sin offering, we are unclean and need to become clean again. When we talked about it, it's not necessarily an admission of sin like we in the Christian thought think. It is that we are unclean and need to become clean. Followed up with the I love God sacrifice, the burnt offering, the devotion to God sacrifice. So he's making himself right before God before something is going to be happening. Or he's making the people right before it's going to be happening. So that's the purpose behind the sin-burnt combo going on here. So let's read a little further. In verse 4, Aaron shall put on the holy linen coat. He shall put on the linen undergarment on his body. He shall wear, or he shall tie the linen sash around his waist and wear the linen turban. These are the holy garments. He shall bathe his body in water and then put them on. He shall then take from the congregation of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Those will be the Day of Atonement sacrifices. The 2 goats for the sin offering and the 1 ram for a burnt offering. What kind of garments does he put on here? What did you notice? They're linen. They're very descriptive. You're wearing a linen coat, undergarment, sash, and turban. What is missing? The crown. No mention of a crown. No mention of the ephod. No mention of what we think of when we think high priestly garments, i.e., what Aaron was required to wear on a daily basis all those chapters ago. When he offers any sacrifice on any day, he is dressed as a high priest. He's not dressed as the high priest here. At least it makes no mention of the things that truly separate him from every other priest. The normal priest wears just linen garments, very similar in description. So what kind of point is Aaron making by his garb when he comes for Day of Atonement? Yeah. And purity. He is pure. He's not really in a high priestly look. Yeah. Oh, I like that. I'm going to steal it. So what I think, no, what Rachel says here is a really good comment, that normally he is God's representative to the people. This time, he's more the people's representative to God. So he dresses humbly. He's not as flamboyantly garbed. He doesn't have all of the trappings that make him so different from everyone else. Ben, you had a comment? Or were you also going to steal Rachel's? That's true. We're one. Yeah. That was my idea. I had a great idea.
Secondly, I don't remember it mentioning anything about a bathing ritual with the other garments.
I think not on a normal basis. Consecration Day did.
But this specifically mentions that with having to do this, once again, like lending itself to the purity idea and the cleanliness, the holiness, the simplicity of what he's doing.
And deliberateness.
Yeah.
This is an intentional day. Any other thoughts? Good comments.
Yes.
At the tabernacle. Yep. Yeah. On holy ground, he's taking care of this. Okay. We've got Aaron appropriately garbed. What are his sons wearing? No one cares. They're wearing the normal stuff. But according to Day of Atonement, they're irrelevant to this discussion. Aaron is the guy. He is going to be doing things and moving things, and his sons are there to be extra hands. That's their whole purpose here. So Aaron, it tells us in verse 6, Aaron offers the bull as a sin offering for himself. So there's our clue. We talked about the bull of a sin offering can be the whole congregation or it can be the priest. It's him. He offers it for himself and shall make atonement for himself and for his house. He is making atonement, allowing him to be clean in the eyes of God. That's the purpose of that sin offering. It can extend into removing sin in more of a Christian concept. But when we went through there, God doesn't talk about sin in that context like you and I understand sin. It's more broken down and separate into separate bits. So, Aaron makes himself ready. Aaron now is clean in the eyes of God. So now he can move a step further. He takes the 2 goats, he sets them before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Aaron casts lots over the 2 goats, one lot for the Lord, the other for Azazel. Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord and use it as a sin offering. The goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement over it, that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel. Some weird stuff going in here, right? First of all, I know everybody's thinking it, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. What in the world is Azazel? We're going to talk about that in a second, because we're all thinking it. But notice the movement going on. He takes these 2 goats, he brings them to the door of the tent of meeting, where the congregation can see what he's doing, and he casts lots over them. One of them is to become a sacrifice for the Lord. He's to use that one as a sin offering. The other one is to be presented alive before the Lord, and then it's going to have something with Azazel, sent away into the wilderness to Azazel, for Azazel. Some of your translations may even use that. So what is Azazel? The short answer is no one really knows. The slightly longer answer is it could be a description of a place in the wilderness. It could be a description of sin and the devilness. Probably not, because that concept really doesn't appear until the Hellenistic age. And then the Greek-minded Jews really liked that, and so they started thinking it as demon-associated, but we don't see a lot of references to that older than it. Probably it's a location. That's probably what it is. But we don't know. So if you want me to be any more clear than that, I won't. Yes. Scapegoat is usually how it's associated. So a lot of translations get rid of the word Azazel and just put scapegoat in, because we don't really know. We don't know. Yep. Every time the 10th of the 7th month comes around. Yeah. Any comments on what we've discussed thus far? Any more comments? Yeah.
On the other day when all the sacrifices, on the Day of Atonement, they couldn't work, right? Couldn't do anything.
Right. You stand there before the Lord.
I don't see how they ever had time to do anything with all this going on. But anyway, this seemed like on the Day of Atonement, it seemed like a day of fine fair party and so forth, which wasn't true on the other days when it sacrificed.
Yeah. Day of Atonement doesn't have as much partying. You're going to get partying in about 5 days. When they get into the booths, it becomes much more of what we think of even like a festival style, is how the Jews frequently would celebrate it. It was a very exciting time for them. But Day of Atonement's a pretty solemn day, because it's the day that you have to say all your sins. That's an awful day. Can you just imagine if once a year you and I had to do that? We're going to see that in a moment, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. That's awful. It's miserable. Okay, so here's your setting. Aaron has made atonement for himself. We're going to have that reiterated down in verse 11. Aaron has selected the goats. Aaron has chosen one for Azazel, one for the Lord. Everything is set. We're ready now. In verse 11, Aaron presents the bull for himself. He kills the bull as a sin offering for himself. He shall take a censer full of coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, and two handfuls of sweet incense beaten small. And he shall bring it inside the veil, and put the incense on the fire before the Lord, and the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is over the testimony, so he does not die. We'll stop there, because that's enough, right? So moving going on here? Like, what logistically is going on? Aaron, it tells us, takes a censer. He fills it with coal from the fire that's before the Lord, so probably the burnt offerings altar, because that's the one that's really being used at this point. And he's going to the altar of incense. And he is supposed to stoke it up. That's its purpose. He's bringing a large amount of incense, he's bringing a large amount of fire, and he's supposed to be coming in and stoking the incense. And its purpose is to create a cloud that covers the mercy seat so he does not die. Why does a cloud need to cover the mercy seat? So he doesn't see God. God dwells between the cherubim. That's a common phrase throughout the Old Testament. That's what it's talking about, is on top of the Ark of the Covenant sits the mercy seat, which is just a rectangle lid. Think of it that way. And on it are two cherubim with their wings together, and God dwells between the cherubim. His glory is there. We saw that a few chapters ago, that it talks about when the tabernacle began and Aaron's doing his sacrifices, that the glory came and dwelt between the cherubim. So in order for Aaron to do anything in the room, he needs to make sure there's a barrier between him and God. Because there's only one person in this discussion of all of Leviticus who gets to talk to God like a friend. And it's not Aaron. Who am I talking about? Moses. He's the only one. He gets to see God's back when he's up on the mountain. He gets to talk to God face to face as a friend inside of his tent of meeting that he sets up outside of the camp. His relationship with God is entirely different. Aaron's is formal. There's no friendship here. The very first things that happen is Aaron serves in the capacity of high priest, and he gets really mad when God kills his sons. Those are the first two things in Leviticus Aaron does in association with God. So he is not friendship level like Moses is. So he needs to have that barrier even further. But it also establishes for the high priests to come. Aaron's not the only high priest ever. His sons have to be able to follow this as well. So they need a relationship that can be exactly the same time and time and time again. Any comments before we finish reading that section? Really just finish reading verse 14. Okay. While he's there, it says, and he takes some of the blood of the bull and he sprinkles it with his finger on the front of the mercy seat on the east side, and in front of the mercy seat he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Which sacrifice, which bull are we talking about? Who was it offered for? It's for Aaron, yes. So he brings his own sacrifice in and sprinkles it with his finger. I assume like this. I don't know why I assume like this. It could be like this for all I know. I have no idea. But we're Americans, and I think this is much more American. But he sprinkles it 7 times. It's right there inside the doorway. That's the reference to the east side. He's not going in and wandering around. It's right there. He's just doing it. And that's it. Any comments on that? Okay, verse 15. Then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering that is for the people, and bring its blood inside the veil, and do with its blood as he did with the blood of the bull, sprinkling it over the mercy seat and in front of the mercy seat. Thus he shall make atonement for the holy place, because of the uncleanness of the people of Israel, and because of their transgressions, all their sins. And so he shall do for the tent of meeting, which dwells with them in the midst of their uncleanness. No one may be in the tent of meeting from the time he enters to make atonement in the holy place until he comes out and has made atonement for himself and for the house and for all of the assembly of Israel. Then he shall go to the altar that is before the Lord and make atonement for it, and shall take some of the blood of the bull and some of the goat and put it on the horns of the altar all around. He shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times and cleanse it and consecrate it from the uncleannesses. ESV has way too many E's and S's at the end of that sentence, that word, of the people of Israel. Okay, some cool stuff going on here. We've got the goat of a sin offering. Who is it offered for? The people. But think back. Only one person gets a goat according to the original laws of a sin offering. Who is it? It's not the people, it's not the congregation, it's not the priests, it's not the normal people, it's the leader. That's it. He is the one that gets a goat. So we're having a deviation. That's the purpose, the point I'm wanting to make here. God established a rule. This is your sin offerings rule. The goat is for the leader. Now we're going to broaden it. This goat that is of a sin offering is not for the leader. It's not for the people. It's for the holy place and the burnt offerings altar. That's really what it's for, isn't it? I mean, he brings the goat of the sin offering that's for the people, and he brings its blood in, but what it does is it makes the holy place clean again. Because he's going to have another one over here, the scapegoat, that's going to have more to do with the people, but he has to get the tabernacle ready first. So he got himself ready. Now he's getting the tabernacle ready. He brings the blood in, he sprinkles it over the mercy seat, making atonement for the holy place itself because of the uncleanness of the people. They have tainted it, is the image. Because it lives on earth, it must be cleansed every single year. Because earth is unclean. That's the image. Every year, God reminded the people that they are disgusting and make his holy things disgusting. And the only thing that makes it not disgusting is if God makes it so. Then he's going to talk to the people. But we can see that image with the stuff, right? He cleanses the mercy seat by sprinkling it as he did with the bull. He brings it out and he cleanses the burnt offerings altar as well, sprinkling the blood of the goat and the bull, putting it on the horns and sprinkling it 7 times as well, consecrating these two things from the uncleanness of the people. So yes, it says up there in verse 15 that this is the sin offering that's for the people, but it really has very little to do with the people. It has everything to do with the fact that they have made God's holy things unclean. And in order for the next year, for them to be able to be used, God's got to make them clean again. And he does it by utilizing the bull and the goat sin offerings, cleansing the priesthood, cleansing the sacrificing locations. Any comments on that before we start talking about some of the middle verses there? Okay, let's get into the meat of what happened. In verse 16, he makes atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the people of Israel, because of their transgressions, all their sins. We talked about that. He does it for the tent of meeting in order to cleanse them of their uncleanness. You cannot enter until this is done. What would happen if a priest enters into the tabernacle before Aaron is done cleansing it of uncleanness? What would he bring in? Uncleanness. Okay, you can't do that. You got to stay out or be cut off. No one may enter the tent of meeting from the time that he enters until he comes out to make atonement for himself, for his house, and for the assembly. Then he goes and he does the rest with the altar. Any comments before we look at 20 through 22? Because the Day of Atonement is not done yet. Honestly speaking, we haven't really atoned to anything. We've cleansed of uncleanness. A whole bunch of stuff's been cleansed of uncleanness. But for atonement to happen, you got to have some repentance involved. You have to have some confession involved, especially. And that's what the next section is going to talk about. In verse 20, it says, when he has made an end of atoning for the holy place and the tent of meeting and the altar, he presents the live goat. Aaron shall lay both of his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities of the people of Israel and their transgressions, all their sins. He shall put them on the head of the goat and send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man who is in readiness. The goat shall bear all their iniquities on itself to a remote area, and he shall let the goat free in the wilderness. This is interesting, isn't it? Because when we think about the Old Testament and we think about how do they get rid of sins, what do we always say? It's the blood of bulls and goats, right? Even Hebrews makes that point. But according to the Day of Atonement, their sins do not go into something that is dead. they're taken away by something that is still alive. Aaron stands with this goat. He places both of his hands on the head, which is interesting because usually it says you place one hand, if you remember back there in the first 9 chapters. He places both. He's grabbing it. And he says all of their iniquities. He confesses all of their transgressions. I don't know what kind of timetable he's got. I really don't. I don't know if this is a quick, we have sinned, here's the bullet points. Or I don't know if the people had to make a list. Like, I really don't. I don't know if Aaron sat down with his sons the night before and they're like, okay, well, let's start back in January. What sins did we do? I really don't. What I do know is that when God said this to Moses, he said that Aaron shall confess all iniquity, all transgression, all their sins. So whatever they did, I can tell you with certainty, it was all. Because otherwise, they're not going to do all that God has commanded. He puts the sins on the head of the goat. He sends it into the wilderness by the hand of someone who has been prepared ahead of time. That individual takes it and takes it far away. So that goat will never come back. Because if it comes back, it brings all those sins back with it. Isn't that cool? Think about what just happened here on the Day of Atonement. Aaron says, I'm unclean. I've got to get clean. So he offers the bull. He says, the stuff we've got are unclean. So he has to cleanse all of those things. And then he places all of their sins on a living being. One who has not died, and one who has no death. He's gone. Ben.
I had a question and a comment, but it's interesting to me how the parallels between the scapegoat and Christ are great. In fact, some of the same terminologies.
I was hoping somebody would go right there.
But it's interesting how some of the same terminologies are even used in Isaiah 53 when foretelling the crucifixion and everything, but yet the scapegoat didn't die. But, Hebrews 13, I think, talks about how, Christ is outside the camp.
Yep.
And we go outside the camp. Of course, the bodies of the dead animals were also burned outside the camp. But it's interesting how the scapegoat is the greatest parallel, really, to what Christ did for us and bore our iniquities and was numbered with the transgressors, that sort of thing. But the scapegoat in this situation does not die. And then my question was, what about this guy who takes the goat off into the wilderness? Did he need to be a priest? I've really never thought about that until we're talking about it now tonight. Who was this? Was it a special job? Or
I think we're gonna get a little more of him in just a minute. I think he's coming up. I think there's only like a verse, but we're going to get a slight more. But yeah, it's just someone who's prepared. I mean, even the phrase in readiness, a man who is in readiness is really a description of like a sojourner or a foreigner, somebody who is on the outside already. Some scholars even hypothesize, including some Jewish ones, that it is a literal foreigner, a local who knows the land and can take it away where the Jews don't know. So even they come up with that idea. Yeah?
I was kind of going with that idea too. Romans 3:25, whom God displayed publicly as a propitiation. So I think that's the same idea.
Yeah.
Propitiation. In his blood through faith, this was to demonstrate his righteousness because of the forbearance of God. He passed over the sins previously committed.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the symbol as it lends into Christ. I think the problem we have with Jesus is that he really fits all of the sacrifices and all of the feast days. You can kind of find him in there. So there is some crossover. But I think when we think about the scapegoat, Jesus took our sins and he took them away. They're laid on him, they're gone. But think about the idea of what will happen when our scapegoat comes back. What does God then do when Jesus returns? That's judgment, right? That is when there no longer is a sacrifice for sins and you have to account for what you've done because the scapegoat came back. And so we can see our symbol Our current hope is still in the scapegoat. We hope that he stays away until we're prepared. We hope that God gets us prepared, because we certainly cannot keep anything clean. As evidenced by the rest of the Day of Atonement, we couldn't even keep the tabernacle clean. We can't even keep the holy things he's entrusted to us clean unless he comes in and takes care of it for us. But when that scapegoat returns, we better be ready. We better be prepared. And so you can see that symbol still in there. What made it?
Tabernacle unclean.
The fact that it was here.
He's got to clean it.
Yeah.
Only the high priest could do that.
I think it's the imperfection. It's the idea that we didn't keep it correctly. It's Aaron still being human, and sure, he offered a sin offering for himself, but he's still man and cannot keep it perfect. Any other thoughts? See why I get excited? Like, that's pretty cool. It deepens our understanding about our current situation, simply because we understand a little more about the physical symbols of what they actually had to do. So let's talk about the end of the day. In verse 23, then Aaron comes into the tent of meeting. He's done the scapegoat. He's done all of that. He comes into the tent of meeting. He takes off his linen garments that he put on when he went into the holy place, and he leaves them there. He bathes his body in water in a holy place. He puts on his garments. These would be his high priestly garments, his normal garments. And he comes out and he offers his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, and makes atonement for himself and for the people. The fat of the sin offering he burns on the altar. And he who lets the goats go to Azazel shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. The bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to make atonement for the holy place, shall be carried outside the camp. Their skin and their flesh and their dung shall be burned up with fire, and he who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterwards he may come into the camp. So we've got a few things going on here. Aaron comes into the tabernacle, he changes his clothes, he bathes, and he puts on his normal garments. Now he is high priest. Before, he's not. He's just the one selected to go into the most holies. But now he is high priest. And as a result, he can come and he can offer burnt offerings for himself and for the people. He is once again that go-between between man and God. And so he offers the burnt offerings. It tells us that he burns the sin offerings after the fashion of a priestly or the congregational offerings, meaning that some of the parts go onto the altar, but the mass majority of them are taken outside of the camp and they're burned. We're told that the individual who takes them outside the camp and does the actual burning of the rest of the body parts has to wash his clothes and bathe his body before he comes back, and then he can come back into the camp. Who would that be, by the way, that actually goes and does that sacrifice? It's another priest, but he's not named, is he? Not even called a priest, it's just he. Because today is not about them, it's about the high priest and God and the people. Oh, and that other priest has got a job he's got to get done. That's that reference. We talk about the guy who took the goat out to Azazel, as Ben was commenting on. Not a lot of details, it's only the verse 26 there. He goes, when he comes back, he bathes, and then he can come back in. Because he's got to get the sin off. Yes?
Significance in using the word bathe in water rather than with water.
Bathe in water rather than bathe with water?
It states bathe in water rather than bathe himself with water.
Could be.
Would that have been in a mikveh where they would completely immerse?
It's possible. She's referencing in the temple area, they had the ones where they could walk through. It's possible once the temple comes up, but with the tabernacle, it's probably referencing the bronze bowl. I'm King James, it's what, laver or something. Probably referencing that they're using, which would be large enough to get in, but I imagine it would be difficult to get in and people could see him. So he still has to be modest, yes, and then Doug.
Different translations translate it differently. Like the New American Standard has with water.
Yeah.
So depends on
It may just be whichever small word they decided to put there. Yeah. Doug.
So I'm back with the guy that's taking the goat out of the camp.
I know, he's fascinating, isn't he?
Right.
Ben's fascinated, you're fascinated, we're all fascinated. And we get 2 verses.
From the way this is going, though, he's back the same day.
Yeah.
So he's got to go someplace where this goat is not coming back, but he's only got a couple hours to do it. So he's
Yes.
busy.
Which means by necessity, the goat is choosing not to come back. Which means it has to be miraculous. Like, that's just the only answer here. God is making it not come back until the goat chooses to come back. Can you still see our current situation? Jesus stays away until he doesn't. Like, that's it. Dennis.
I think some of the later rabbinic writings said, implied that they would drive the goat over a precipice and offer it up that way.
Yeah, I did read some of the later ones. That's why they solved it. It makes me wonder if that's because the goat came back. If during some of those periods where God does not cleanse them and they stay in sin for years and years, it makes me wonder if the goat comes back, because that is their solution. We're just going to go and kill the goat. But that's not what God says. You can't kill the goat. It's always alive. Yeah. Any other comments? Okay. Let's finish off the chapter, 29. It shall be a statute to you forever, that in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict yourselves, and you shall do no work, neither the native or the stranger or who sojourns among you. For on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse you. You shall be clean before the Lord from all your sins. It is a Sabbath of solemn rest to you. You shall afflict yourselves. It is a statute forever. And the priest who is anointed and consecrated as priest in his father's place shall make atonement, wearing the holy linen garments. He shall make atonement for the holy sanctuary. He shall make atonement for the tent of meeting and for the altar. He shall make atonement for the priests and for all the people of the assembly. And this shall be a statute forever for you, that atonement may be made for all the people of Israel once in the year because of all their sins. And Aaron did as the Lord commanded Moses. So again, circular to get to Aaron, right? Aaron's relationship's not the same. But this is your summary. Everybody is to be afflicted. Everybody is involved in this day. Whether it's you as a Jew or it's the guy that just happens to live nearby. He is bound by this law. In fact, when we get into chapter 25 next Wednesday and we start talking about the year of Jubilee, he is bound by that law. He's bound by how he keeps slaves. Even if he's not a Jew, you follow the law of the land, or you pay the consequences as a result. For this day, God makes atonement for you. He makes a cleansing to cleanse you from all of your sins. And he lists off everyone who is cleansed here. All of the holy things that are cleansed, the holy people that are cleansed, and the regular people that are cleansed, in order to provide them with another year that they can serve God and they don't die. Any comments anybody has? Thank God, God already did it all. Like, honestly, he did the Day of Atonement for us. We're just waiting for the scapegoat to come back. Like, it's been taken care of. God, once for all, sent the goat off into the wilderness. And it's still there. We're still functioning under that 1 year. Like, that's us today. We're functioning under 1 year because when that goat comes back, when our high priest returns, he's got to cleanse everything again. You can think about it. Hebrews makes the point. You can think about our current situation as the high priest has gone into the Holy of Holies and he's done his job. But he's still there at the side of God. Because Hebrews says once he leaves that, then we have to have judgment. So you can read through that and think about it under that frame. So what we've got here, and we're not going to get into it, but going back to chapter 23, we have one more feast we're going to be discussing. We're going to get into it next Wednesday. The whole congregation has been cleansed. The whole congregation now can serve God. This is the cleanest clean that they're going to be clean for the whole year. And the first feast that God is going to have them do in chapter 23 is the Feast of Booths, 5 days later. They're going to celebrate that they are the cleanest clean that they are going to be for the whole year. Because that one feast, its whole purpose is to celebrate living in harmony with God. Once they're in the land, they live in booths, to remember when they were in the wilderness, living in harmony with God. So we'll get into that next week. I'll go ahead and end a few minutes early. Does anybody have any questions? Because we've probably got like a minute. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, there's some references to it. Anything else? Okay, we'll go ahead and be dismissed. Next time, read the rest of 23. We'll get into 25.
Majesty, power and strength to the Lord.